Okay, it is Henry again, and today I'm going to be doing a work in progress video on the 1:100 scale Gundam Barbatos. And normally I probably wouldn't do a full work in progress video on it because I'd just be doing like a paint job, but I've decided to do a couple of minor modifications, well, I don't know about minor, but a couple of modifications to the kit. The first modification being the hands. The hands on this kit are okay. They're basically just 1:100 scale high grade hands. You got a big obvious gap there for the weapon. The thumb looks kind of funky. And then the open hands are just sort of lifeless and don't really have any expression at all. So what I did is I bought this set of hands from Kotobukiya. They're called Wild Hand. And I just thought that they really had a similar look to the Barbatos hands and figured that would be a good match. And luckily, they are the perfect size. They are almost the exact same size as the Barbatos hands, but they look so much better. But they still have that pointy look to them and just have the same general style. They're just much more expressive. And the ball joint is the same size, so that's no problem. And this kit doesn't come with closed fists, but with the, where'd the other one go? It's somewhere in here. But with the Kotobukiya hands, we get closed fists. So that is a plus. Now the back of the hand looks like that, so I did have to do a small modification. Oh, there's the other fist. I did have to do a small modification. I basically just drilled a little hole in the back of the hand and shaved off a little bit of this rectangle here and shaved off a piece of plastic on that thing, and took all of about 5 minutes. So now we got really good looking hands on this kit. So that's modification number 1. Modification number 2 has to do with probably people's only gripe about this kit, because everything else about it is fantastic: the lack of a mace. So I put out a request on Twitter and had a couple people give me the measurements for the 1:144 scale Barbatos mace, and I just did the math and scaled that up to 1:100 scale. So I am going to be scratch building a 1:100 scale Barbatos mace. And I've started off here with this width of plastic tubing. Let's see, I just dropped my ruler. This is 4.8 millimeter plastic tubing. I've got a slightly wider one that fits just around it. And I'm basically just going to be using the wider tubing for this little ring right here where it's a little bit wider, and then the actual mace part I'll be making out of various widths of ply plate. Okay, after working on the mace a little bit, I've gotten a kind of rough construction going on here, and it actually is turning out really cool. I'm excited about this. So I made the pole a little bit longer than it was in the measurements, just because I thought having it being a little bit longer would look a little bit better. But yeah, I basically just took some 2 millimeter ply plate and cut out this shape by tracing from the plan I showed you a few minutes ago, and then just did that 4 times and glued each of those 4 pieces onto the central shaft with plastic cement, and there we go. So this is actually really rough. I haven't done any cleanup or anything on this. Now the hard part is done. All I have to do now is clean up the edges with a little bit of sandpaper. I've got to scribe some lines on the shaft, and then I'm just going to go in with some 1/4 millimeter ply plate and do these raised details right here. And this central little part right here that's going to go between the blades of the mace, I think I'm just going to do that with epoxy putty. I feel like that would be quicker and easier than trying to do it with ply plate. So the mace is now done. All of the detailing has been done, made the little central part. I said in the last segment I was going to try to use epoxy putty, but for whatever reason I just decided to go with pla plate. It didn't end up being as hard as I thought it was going to be, and that's going to be lighter than epoxy putty anyway, because this thing is kind of top heavy anyway. It's already sort of hard for Barbatos to hold on to it. Anyway, as you can see, did some scribing and detailing on the handle. Also got these raised details on the edges of the blades, and even did the little pile driver spike on the end. What I did is I cut the shaft right here and inserted a very small polycap in this wider section, just for that spike to slide through so it'll stay in place. And then I've got a little nub on the end of the shaft there, and really all you got to do is just find something to poke it with and push that through, and the spike comes out the end, and it actually runs the entire length of the mace, so you can pull that out really as long as you want it to be, and then you can push that back in. It's really kind of a tight polycap, so it's definitely not going to slide out accidentally. Anyway, put this in here. It was able to just slide in and out of Barbatos's hand until I glued these little details onto it, and now I kind of have to assemble the hand around it. The Kotobuki hands actually are a little bit too, the hole for the weapon isn't quite big enough to hold on to it, so I have to use the Bandai hands to use the mace. Let's see, put this down here. And really, it's, unless you're going to have the mace sitting on the ground, or the end on the ground, it's kind of best to use a two-handed approach, because you see it is pretty heavy. You kind of have to pose him at a certain angle, otherwise he's going to tilt over, but he can hold it. Just, he can hold it at certain angles, you know. If you put it up very high, he's going to kind of lean over. I don't know, he's doing a pretty good job right now, but anyway, point being, the mace is heavy at this end. So, that about does it for the modification phase of this work in progress video. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of weathering on Barbatos and then get him painted up for you. so now that I've got all the basic airbrushing done, got all my masking finished, I'm just doing a little bit of hand brushing on some of the details that are just a little bit too small to bother trying to mask. Like these little pipes here on the forearm. I'm just sort of painting those gray. And yeah, done a few other little things like hand brushing some silver accents on these little pistons and pneumatics and things, like here on the feet and back of the ankle right there. The symbols on the legs and the shoulders and the chest, instead of trying to mask those, which would have been insanely tedious, I just hand brushed those. I just used some sort of thin red enamel and then just almost kind of like a panel line wash, but if the panel line was like 2 millimeters wide. It wasn't nearly as thin as what I would use for panel line wash. It was kind of halfway between straight out of the bottle red and a really thin enamel. So anyway, did that, and once I get the rest of these little cables painted gray, all the painting will be done and I can move on to decals. One thing I've done is I've done some weathering. I think I mentioned earlier that I was gonna go over some of the parts with the Dremel and just sort of bang up the edges. Like here's the mace, for example. Zoom in on this. Got all those chipped edges and scratches and scrapes all over it. I think that turned out really cool looking. And I didn't do any actual weathering on the inner frame, I don't think. I think I just limited it to the outer armor. But one place in particular I really went to town on it was on the face. I kind of went for an Exia repair look. On this side, everything's more or less fine. But on this side, I really weathered it pretty heavily, and then went in with the airbrush and did a little bit of black right on one side of the face. And I actually cut off one of the eyes, the green part, and replaced it with a tiny little 1 millimeter plastic rod, and then just painted the tip of that rod red to give it the little red camera up in there. So I think that's going to look really cool, especially when I get all the dry brushing and get this thing flat coated. So really excited about the way this is going to turn out. Alright, so here I am doing the decals. Obviously this kit doesn't come with any, so I've got some Wave X decals, a sheet of gray, and a sheet of white. I threw in a couple others from leftover master grades. And you guys have seen me do decals before, so there really isn't a whole lot of explanation here. Just putting on the Mr. Mark setter, pulling the decal up, putting it on, working out the air bubbles, and there you go. And once that is dry, I'll put on some Mr. Mark softer. Okay, going to start off the weathering process by doing a wash. I recently got this Mr. Weathering color. I've got black, also have brown, and it's basically just an enamel wash. As you can hear, it's got a little metal ball down inside it to help mix up paint, so that's useful. It does have a brush in the cap. I thought it would, but it doesn't. But that's okay, I've got plenty of paint brushes. And washes are relatively straightforward. You just wipe it on, let it get down in there, fill in the panel lines, the little nooks and crannies and things, and then just go in, wipe away the excess, and it leaves all of your details inked in. And yeah, just going to do this with all the rest of the parts, and then on to the next step. And now that the wash is done, I'm doing some chipping. I went and did some of the bigger chips with a paintbrush and just some dark gray enamel paint, and now I've got a small sponge, and I'm just going in and doing some of the lighter chipping. Just like that. That might be a little bit too much. Clean that up a bit. But anyway, yeah. And just finishing up the last of the weathering by doing a little bit of dry brushing. And the weathering overall, I'm not doing nearly as heavy as I did on my Leo from last year. The same process is just not weathering it quite as much. Oh, oops, I don't want it to look as rough as the Leo did, so. Alright, and after all that work, the Barbatos is finally done. Got them all painted up. This is actually the first time I've seen them myself. After getting everything assembled after paint. I think probably not as quite a good a job as I did on weathering the Leo, but I think it still turned out halfway decent. One of the things I wish I had done different was the decals. The white decals I used on the darker colored parts are fine, but these gray decals I used on the light gray parts really didn't show up very well at all. And then when I did the weathering on top of them, that obscured them even more. So I wish I had had some black decals to use, but I didn't, so I just went with what I had on hand. But the hand modifications turned out great. Here's the damaged head with a little red eye down in there. I thought that turned out really cool. There is the katana, all painted up. The cannon, did masking for the white parts. Added a little third-party camera lens for the camera there. And of course, the mace, I think turned out especially nice. There it is. You can see I actually ended up making it a little bit bigger than it should be compared to its 1:144 scale version. So, but I think the increase in proportion actually makes it look a little bit more menacing, and I think the weathering on the mace turned out halfway decent as well. So, all in all, I'm pretty happy with the way this guy turned out. And after this, I'll upload a video showing off the painted and completed kit. So with that, I'll see you guys next time.